Hello, beautiful beings. I'm Carol Rathel. My mission is to help people connect to their sacred self, to unite with their soul, and to live their passion and their life purpose. I'm really happy to be doing my first YouTube video. It's been an experience, I can tell you. Yeah, I've tried several different ways to do this, so it's time now to do this with my cell phone, and we'll see how it goes. But today, I really wanted to share with you my story of awakening. My story of awakening began when I was, what I can remember, began when I was around 3 or 4 years old. I used to leave my body. I left my body because something was happening to my body that was really unpleasant, and we will get into that later when I do a series on healing from childhood abuse. But for now, this is about my awakening. So when I left my body, I crossed time, I crossed space, and I used to go and visit a being. She had beautiful, long, flowing white hair. I remember she had a white gown. She wasn't really, the whole place where I met her was amazing. There was this tree, and the place wasn't earth-like at all. And I would spend time with her, and then it would be time to come back to my body, and I would go to sleep. That happened in England, and when I was 6 years old we travelled to New Zealand, and somehow or other I had managed to forget about all of that. We don't really organise our memory very well at that age anyway, so we lived in Wellington in New Zealand, and I recall spending a lot of my life hanging out down by the river, the Hutt River, in Upper Hutt. We had a lot of access to it. It wasn't very built up in those days, so it's kind of like a really wild nature spot. And being a nature spirit that I am, I hung out there a lot. One of the most striking memories I have of being awakened was when I was about 8 years old. We lived in Upper Hutt, and we had those big quarter-of-acre sections back in the day. And I remember I was in a really crappy mood, and I was outside. I was hanging out by an apricot tree, and I remember thinking, why did I have to come and be in this body? Why was I in here? Of all the bodies that I could have been in, why couldn't I have been in a body in a girl in China? And I really gave that a lot of thought. I even tried to leave my body and see if I could go to China and hop into a girl, but yeah, that didn't work, fortunately. But it did awaken in me that knowledge that we were more, far more than the body. That experience when I was 3 or 4 had been completely forgotten. My brain had segmented it and wiped it out for my protection. So, yeah, we're not just our body. I was a very shy child. We moved a lot, and I didn't make friends easily, and I found it very difficult with all the different schools that we went to. So I just kept to myself, kept to my own business. And so we moved to Auckland when I was 9, and I went to a primary school, and they had those, they had monthly book clubs where you'd buy a book, because of course it was before internet. So I bought this book, and it was called Touch Not the Cat. And it was a story about a woman who had these conversations in her mind with somebody else, and it was a man, and she didn't know who this man was. So she would talk with him, and she'd wander around this garden. I think she must have lived in one of those English mansions with the huge gardens, and she'd wander around there and touch plants, and she'd be talking to this man. Anyway, it turned out that he was the gardener, and they fell in love. It was a happy ending, as romance stories were and do. But it was the talking in the mind that really got me. You know, we call it telepathy, don't we? Didn't know that at that time. And I really wanted to talk to somebody else in my mind, so probably, I don't remember, but I probably spent some time trying to talk to Mum and Dad and my sister, but they had no idea. And back in that time, it wasn't really the thing to do. Telepathy and psychic phenomena was just totally not talked about. So, of course, it died again, the interest. And I remember also a really striking thing that got me interested in what's the big picture, what's the whole picture of life. When there was this program on TV, and it was about a young man and a young lady in their late teens, and they would travel in time. I think it might have been called Time Slip. And I remember they were in the Ice Age, and they were trying to find their way back through a rip in the fabric of, it was a wormhole, as we know it now. And they were trying to find it again and open it so they could go back home. And then they went into an era of desert when we were really hot on Earth. So, yeah, that was really fascinating to me, and piqued my interest. I went away from home when I was 18, and I studied to become an occupational therapist. One of the best things I did. I grew so much. But I was also very unwell. I started to become really unwell then. I got into an physically abusive relationship, and I wasn't coping with life, and I felt quite powerless. I didn't realise it, but I was the typical people pleaser who learned to keep everything cool. Just keep everything cool and things would be safe. And I would try and do that. And so I became ill. I had developed bulimia. And yeah, I won't go into the details. I will do a series on healing, because I'm really big on how self-love heals, and how we can't heal without self-love. Self-love is the key, and so we'll do a series on healing. But for now, I graduated, I got a job at the local hospital and had a career in occupational therapy. I became married, and he was a really nice guy, actually. He had issues of his own. He had a painful past as well. But to cope with life, I was big time being bulimic, drinking alcohol. We also smoked a bit. And there came a point where I just realised I was killing myself. I knew that I was really unhealthy, and I wanted to find out why. So I travelled into the city of Auckland and had therapy. And the therapist asked me about my past. Did something happen in my past? I said no. Anyway, she said, go and write a journal and write down everything you can remember. And that was when I remembered those little trips out of my body to visit that lady by the tree in that spirit world. And I also remembered what was going on. I didn't remember a lot. Thankfully, thank God, my brain has encapsulated all of the memory except for one when I had a vision. Well, I had a vision of what happened, and that was enough because I came back to my body in the middle of it. So that began my healing. I was able to quit the heavy alcohol. I stopped the smoking, and I stopped the bulimia, and I just felt my emotions. And that began a phase of life that was really exciting. In the time before we go to sleep, and in that little bit of time when we're waking up, our brain goes from this really slow pattern, which is delta when we're asleep, into a slightly more awake pattern, which is when the body is asleep, but the mind and spirit are awake. And they call that theta. I remember I would have spontaneous out-of-body experiences just as I was waking up, and it was cool. I didn't go very far from the house, so I wasn't confident in going far. I didn't quite know what to do with it. The things I could have done. But I remember one morning I'd slept in the spare room because my husband snored and I couldn't sleep, so I went and slept in the spare room, and my cat would go and sleep down between my feet. And I woke up, or I got to the state where I hopped out of my body, and I thought, oh, I'll go and visit my husband in the room next door and tell him I'm out of my body. So I went in there and it was like, hey, wake up. And, you know, I couldn't touch him. And then he opened his eyes, and I sort of backed off a bit, and he got up. And I was backing on my way towards the door. And then I thought, oh, shivers, he's coming through the door. He's going to walk right through me. So I shot past him into the room again. And I stayed in there until he had gone through and he was in the bathroom. So I came out and I went back to my body. But I was going so fast, I went shooting up from the foot of my bed, zhung, and slammed back into my body. The cat jumped as I was swooping over him. He was like, as cats do. And then I was in my body and I opened my eyes. And my husband was coming out of the bathroom and I said, hey, guess what? I just had an out-of-body experience. And he said, I know, I felt you in the doorway. And so I told him what had happened, and he verified it, and it was like, oh, wow, that is just amazing. And I'd had validation. I knew it wasn't just in my mind, because having been trained as an occupational therapist, I became very left brain there for many years, and people didn't leave their body. It was hallucinations or an imaginary dissociation experience. But I knew it was real, and so did my husband. And that kind of led on to a really big journey that we did together in exploring spirituality. It was the New Age movement in the 90s. Big New Age movement. There were crystal shops, bookshops. There were all sorts of books. There was The Road Less Travelled. I forget the author. It was a good book. And we had friends, and we used to do spiritual experiments together, and I did a couple of personal development courses and learnt to open my heart. And from that moment, I had a very special relationship with my husband. Until then, I had my heart closed, and partly that was because when we left England, we had to leave my beloved grandparents behind, and I really bonded with my grandfather. So when we left to come to New Zealand, the pain was so much to bear that I just put a wall around my heart. And it's like, I'm never going to love somebody like that again. Some memories can be so potent, can't they? So where was I? Oh yes, opened up my heart and learnt to love my husband. And we had quite a few good years together. We joined they call the Gypsy Fair. It was every weekend we would travel to different towns and put on shows, and we'd sell goods, and I sold my herbal preparations, and we really had a good time. But it turned out that he and we had different goals in life, and we grew apart, and we parted as friends. But he's such an important part of my journey, and I love him dearly. He's remarried now, and so we don't really connect anymore because I respect their relationship. So I went and lived by a beach. I lived alone, and I joined a group of friends, or a group of women who became my friends, and they met and gathered around the Neil Donald Walsh books, Conversations with God. They created groups and worked through the books. So I got to know this group of friends, and they taught me about this lady who was a channel. Her name was Dawn, and maybe I could come along to a session. And I'd never really thought much about channeling. They had card readers and rune readers and what have you at the Gypsy Fair, but I always kind of figured that we create our own life, and I would look within for my answers. So I thought, well, okay, I'll go along and find out. And I walked into the room, and Dawn was there with her parents, and I looked at her and I said, I know you. And she said, I know you too. And I looked at her parents and I said, I know you too. And they said, yeah, we're probably part of the same soul family. I was like, what? And they said, yeah, we've probably had many lifetimes together, and that was my introduction to reincarnation. I'd never given it any thought, it never come up. So, yeah, it was a really powerful, powerful moment. It was like, I know you so well, like you're my sister. And we did touch, because of course I had some channels done by her, and I learnt a lot about myself. We'd had lifetimes together, and we work together now, but we don't do it while I'm awake, we do it while we sleep. So anyway, I became aware that there was this other soul in my energy field, and I'd also recently got into a new relationship, and this new soul wanted to come in and be my child. And I asked this guy I was with, I said, do you want to father a child? You know, I was in my 30s, and it was kind of like, do it now or never, because I hadn't had a child before then, of course. So he said, yeah, I wouldn't mind parenting again, because he had two grown-up daughters to different mums. So, yep, I got pregnant, and within 5 days of being pregnant, I was with Dawn, and we're having this conversation with the spirit of my son, his soul. And she said, yeah, he's really confident. He's just like, yeah, don't worry, Mum, I'll take care of things. And she said, he's really rather cocky. And my son is now, in 2020, he's 19 years old, and he is super confident. He's really purpose-driven, and his girlfriend describes him as cocky. So that was a really, really magic experience, that whole thing of getting pregnant with him. the whole communication he and I had when he was a baby, would communicate with our eyes and mind. It was just really super special. I was very blessed. It turned out that in my history, as well as this childhood abuse, was narcissistic abuse. And it turned out that being a people pleaser, I was the ideal friend or partner of a narcissist. And when my son was grown, I found myself in an incredibly toxic situation. I was being abused and I had to get out of there. And to get out of there, I had to lose everything that mattered to me. And so I came to live here, and I'm in a beautiful English caravan. This is the nest. And I live in a beautiful place in nature now, in a really nice community. But when I got here, I was a wreck. I was a real wreck. I had actually reached the stage of overwhelmment in the situation I was in, when I knew I had to get out and I knew that I couldn't take certain things with me, and the grief was so overwhelming. I overdosed. I don't think I intended to kill myself, but I overdosed. And I was in hospital, and I remember them taking my blood pressure. And I remember they read out a number that was something like 75/40. And I thought, at the time, I remember thinking, oh gosh, that's really dangerously low. And I fought it. I fought then to stay alive. I made the choice. I was going to live and actually make a point of living. Not that I wanted to die, but I had that choice in that moment, I think, and I chose life. So I got here, and all of a sudden I had only myself to look after. And I thought, well, I might as well get on with this business of learning to love myself and healing, because I had been on YouTube, I'd been looking things up, I'd been learning about narcissistic abuse, I had been learning that it's very connected with the past, and people kept saying, love yourself, but it's like, well, what is it? And I looked it up and I couldn't find the information, so I thought, right, I'm just going to do loving myself. So I did loving myself and opened my heart to myself. And by doing that, all of the pain that was in my heart got shifted out. I cried it out, and I cried it out. I walked it out. I put a kit set shed on here too. It's my lounge kitchen kind of thing. And so I climbed up and down ladders. And I just, being an occupational therapist as well, I gave myself occupational therapy. I used activity, I used crafts, I made polymer clay roses and flowers and angels, and I just gave myself so much love. I did the things I loved to do, and I healed. I remember waking up one morning and I suddenly realised I felt really good. I was happy to be waking up. Before then, I'd kind of most mornings been waking up and crying. I had quit smoking. I'd long since quit drinking anything. I was completely clear of any intoxicants, except for painkillers for various injuries. I also have a heart condition. I had developed acute heart failure a few years ago, and I went through a series of operations to have a special pacemaker fitted, and I'm alive today, thanks to modern medicine. But yes, I woke up and I felt like I was a completely different person. I wondered if perhaps I'd had a walk-in. You know, you hear about making agreements before you come into life with another soul, and they come in and take over the body at some point because they don't want to go through growing up. They want to remember their mission. They didn't want to risk forgetting it. So I thought, well, have I had a walk-in? But I was still very much here. And I thought, no, that's not right. And then I kind of figured out that I had a walk-in of my soul. What had happened, and what I know that we can do, is we can actually change our DNA. Our soul light, our soul energy comes into the body in our DNA. And there's been science experiments that prove that. And that's a series I'm really looking forward to sharing with you. I've done so much research. I've 30 years of research. And they have proven DNA attracts light. And we are light in our purest essence. And the amount of light that comes into us can heal us, can change our DNA. So what I had done was I had changed my DNA. I was no longer a person who had been abused. I felt like it just wasn't part of my past. I'd lifted above it. It just wasn't on the emotional bandwidth anymore. And with that awakening came my life purpose. I spent 2 or 3 years now coaching and helping people love themselves, helping people recover from narcissistic abuse and childhood abuse, and helping people awaken. It's time to meet you on YouTube. It's time to spread the message of self-love. I want to create a self-love movement where we just awaken one person at a time to really loving themselves and feeling whole and knowing that they are a really powerful spirit in their body, that they're not just a body, they're not their pain, they're this beautiful spirit, and we come here to live through our body. And so that's the story of my awakening. And the purpose of the childhood abuse is, as bad as it was, I chose it as a soul, because when we awaken and recover from abuse, that's when we can have a spiritual awakening. That's when we remember our mission. And I did. It was quite late in life, but divine timing, right? The world is ready now to hear my message. A lot of the information that part of my series we're going to do is backing up spirituality with science. There's been so much now that proves very, very spiritual concepts are real. And it's through the world of quantum physics and beyond that. So now's the time. I'm glad to share my story. And I hope that you have subscribed already. But if you haven't, please subscribe. And please hit the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any more content, because we're going to dive deep into some really interesting subjects, and remembering that my purpose is to help you. I'm helping you with your awakening and ascension journey. And oh yeah, there's so much more. I look forward to sharing that with you. So for now, goodbye, beautiful beings. I look forward to seeing you again, and I will be waiting in the next video. Much love.